So was it a sign of global warming or just nature being a tease, giving us all that lovely semi-wintry weather, then to smack us so hard and back into the daily shoveling business, which is good for my body, and it's where I put my cranky parts because I don't like it. So, and it's here. Yeah, it's here. The long, long walk we take here in West Michigan between Christmas and Easter, which kind of bookends the winter for us, doesn't it? I think it was W.H. Auden in his poem, For the Time Being, who said that after Christmas there is this monotonous march toward Lent and Easter. And I think we do that really, really well here, because as the two Vermont farmers said once on a beautiful spring day with the sun out and the skies were blue, the one said to the other, beautiful weather we're having, and the other one said, yep, we'll pay for this. And I think here in West Michigan we eagerly pay for all of our bounty, except, of course, if you were able to decamp to Florida or other places. I know some Fountain Streeters are there right now, and we hate them. But taking a more constructive point of view, we know that spiritual life is a long conversation, an assortment of seasons itself. It is a time when we converse back and forth between our inner and outer lives, when the difficulties struggle to be understood and the pleasures struggle to remain. And I think this is an analogy to our winter, when we have beautiful moments and strugglesome moments, when we try to stay warm and at the same time always feel the chill. And Sunday is the time when we take stock of it all, when we pause to take a moment of reckoning with this lifetime spiritual conversation we hold with ourselves. And whenever I speak to you on Sunday, it is my task to be as authentically present to you in that conversation as I can, not because I have something great to say, but because perhaps it will quicken a word that comes up from your own souls, that will spark a conversation you will have with yourself later. And thus the prayer I always utter when I start my sermons is actually yours. So may these words of my mouth and yours, and the prayer and the meditations of my heart and yours, be found true in thy sight, that and who is my rock and my Redeemer. We get signals all the time that what we should be paying attention to. And this January, a number of signals showed up all at once, and I could see them coming, so I was able to prepare for them. One of which was that this is the King anniversary, and you who know me know that I chair the local urban league, and that tomorrow there will be a breakfast in his honor, meaning Dr. King, and some of you will be there, and I'm just delighted that you will be there. And Fountain Street will have a little name on a table, so we'll be present institutionally, and of course people know that I serve here, so it is a strengthening moment for us, and I'm really glad to do that. So I was thinking about Dr. King, but I was also remembering that Dr. King, who I remember being alive, and I remember when he died, also was someone to whom it was very uncomfortable to have too many honors paid. He always used those moments to preach his message, not to bask in the approval of others. A responsive reading we have in our hymn book tells us that it's always easier to honor the prophet than the prophet's message. We're much more likely to revere the hero than to follow in the hero's footsteps. And I think Dr. King would echo that he would rather not have all the attention paid to him and his story and his life, and have more of us pay attention to his message and his call and our duty. And so I'm not going to talk about Dr. King today. You can do all sorts of things on your own, and I encourage you so to do. But one of the things that happened this year, as I noticed it, was the King weekend. I looked it up, and sure enough, January 16th is the day when you can date the beginning of the Arab Spring. That was the day that the president of Tunisia gave up power, when the first rebellion became a revolution. And of course, we've seen the dominoes fall since. Some of them won't fall and others just teeter. And so we have a prophet whose message was liberation. at every turn. And we have the experience of seeing that message enacted, not here at home, but in another location. And then I observed that this week is the beginning of the ritual reading of the book of Exodus in the synagogues around the world. It's called the Book of Names, Shemot. And the passage I read to you is one of the ones that was read yesterday all over the world. And of course, what is the message that God is giving Moses as Moses pays attention, but to go and free my people Israel? So we have three messages of liberation all coinciding in one weekend. And that's important because liberal religion, the word liberal itself, is connected to that sense of freedom, of being free, of not being constrained. And of course, the whole of the Christian Protestant movement is an effort to free themselves from the oppressions they perceive the church in Rome was imposing, to free themselves from authority that kept them from being true to themselves. I mean, the whole notion of the priesthood of all believers is that no one should stand between you and your God, that you are free to find your way to the truth, whatever that is. That's why they love that passage in Paul when he says, and I've quoted this earlier, work out your own salvation in fear and trembling. That no one can make you a Christian against your will. You have to do it on your own. You must be free to do it. And we in this church have taken that to the logical extent of saying even the freedom not to be a Christian is a religious moment. Because if it's heartfelt and honest, if it is true to you, then it is real. Paul Tillich, the notorious Lutheran existentialist theologian, once observed somewhere that an honest atheist is more true to God than a pretend Christian. It is true, because to be honest with yourself about your faith is more faithful than someone who phones it in or merely pretends. And we value that here at Fountain Street Church, which is why when people say, are you Christians? I say, I don't know, you got to ask them. Some are, some aren't. Some would like to be, some would rather not. Some combine it with other things. Some are on Sunday, but not on Thursday. But they'll tell you that as opposed to those who say they're Christians all week long and aren't. So we are a mixture, a motley crew, and we value that. We value it because that freedom to think your own thoughts, have your own beliefs, make your own way, to work out your own salvation is so precious to us. It's at the bottom of what liberal religion is about. That's the one thing we can't change. Anyone who stood here and said, you've got to believe this, you'd be out the door, wouldn't you? And you should. That would violate the very nature of our religion. And for the next couple of weeks, I'm going to talk about those core things that we can't do without. And the first one, the foundational one, is this notion that you have to decide for yourself what you're going to believe or not. And that should not inhibit your belonging to this church or being part of it, because your authenticity is more precious to us than your compliance. It's a great gift. I love it. But I want to tell you it's a lot more complicated than that. And that's the problem we have along with every other religion. We tend to distill things down to one slogan and think that that says it all. So I want to get further into liberation today. I'm going to take it a little further because this free your mind thing is really important, but it's a lot more complicated than it sounds. And it's, well, let me start with where I could have gone. Now, I could tell you all about the history of liberal religion. Now, that would be a lot of fun. And I'm a good historian. I could tell you about John Wycliffe and Jan Hus and all those other guys. And I could also name dates and facts and figures, and you'd walk out of here feeling like you'd been to a first-class lecture. I'd even teach you how to say words like infralapsarian and transcendentalism, and you'd be so learned when you left, and it would be a really bad sermon. Because sermons have another task. They are to put a challenge out there and ask you to respond to it. And the challenge I want to give you today is the title of my sermon, Liberate. That's our task. That's our mission, to liberate. And that sounds like a great task, and it is. And Angela Davis and Wangari Maathai and Desmond Tutu and all these people you've already heard from and will encourage us to this liberating life. But I'm now going to give you the 4 warnings that if you start on this path, you might be tempted to turn around and go back. And I'm going to use the story from Exodus because many of you know pieces of it already, so I don't have to fill in the details. Let's start with Desmond Tutu's observation that liberation is costly. That's what he says. It's in a reading in our hymn book. It's costly. And what he meant was